Hi, I'm Reverend Kim Polchow, Marshfield United Methodist Church and the Streams MUMC YouTube channel, and I'm here to do part 2 of episode 1 of the United Monarchy, and we're going to talk about the sources of the information that we know and what we know about Samuel. So the source we're going to talk about are the books of Samuel. And those aren't the only sources we'll be using from the Bible for this class, but they're the sources that give us the early information that we want for where we are in the point of learning. And the book of Samuel was originally one book, and it got split up at some point into 2 separate books. But if you read it, you can read it all the way through just as though it was one book, because it is just one book. The book of Samuel is not history as we think of it. Of course, the concept of history is a very modern term. The idea that we have sources and we provide evidence and a timeline and we sign things when we write them, that's very, very modern. But it is more historical than other books of the Bible. It is attempting to give you a background and the stories from the past. So in that sense, it is historical, but it is very, very artistic in its approach. And the approach of Samuel is to tell you the backgrounds of the leaders. So they're giving you the story of the leader. They're not giving you this happened, then this happened, then this happened chronologically. They are very much trying to tell you the story of the individual leaders. And so that's part of why this class focuses on these different leaders. This is the episode on Samuel. Next time is the episode on Saul. So we're following the way the scripture itself talks about these characters. They're telling you the story of the individual leader. One of the questions I always ask when we look at a book of the Bible is, what did the author know and what did they not know? Because that gives scholars an idea of the timing of the writing of the book. So we know that the author was aware that the kingdom, this united monarchy that is set up, actually became a divided monarchy. So it knows that Israel and Judah eventually become 2 kingdoms, but it absolutely does not seem to know that Israel falls in the 700s. And so the possible dating for this book is from like the 10th century to the 8th century. The book of Samuel is somewhat repetitive, which leads scholars to think that maybe it is a compilation from different sources, maybe oral traditions, maybe written fragments, or whole written transcripts. There are multiple versions of the same information in the same book, which typically means they were trying to bring different ideas from different places or different times together in a way that was more, I'll give you A, B, C, and D, instead of trying to harmonize them into one single edition. We will go over this in a later episode, but it is thought that these different versions of the story were sort of redacted or edited gently by the biblical author or authors that are known as DTRH, which is short for the Deuteronomistic historian. We will get much deeper into DTRH in future episodes. Samuel also is not just a stand-alone book. It shares some agreement in stories with the King's tradition and the Chronicles tradition. So you've got 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. These are going to be the main sources for this study, and Samuel is going to share some stories in common with those books, meaning they came from different places or different times, different authors, but they have some of the same material that Samuel is talking about. Who was Samuel himself? Now, you run into the same issue when you think about traditional authorship. just as Exodus is traditionally thought to have been written by Moses, and then you have the awkward moment of Moses telling about his own death. Also, it's not in the first person. I don't know. It's strange. I'm okay with Exodus not being written by Moses, and I'm okay with Samuel not being written by Samuel, which also talks about the death of Samuel. So when I talk about Samuel, I'm going to differentiate for you whether I'm talking about the book of Samuel or the person of Samuel. But in general, up until now, I've been talking about the book of Samuel. Now we're going to talk about the person of Samuel, which the book of Samuel is about. Samuel was the last judge of Israel, and he is a pivotal character for the history of Israel because he's the one that stands at the end and at the beginning. Samuel is the last judge and then sort of hands the keys to the kingdom over because the Israelites have these new circumstances, which in part we talked about in part 1 of this episode, the external pressures, but Samuel is also going to have to deal with the internal pressures. Basically, he's going to have to deal with the Israelites when they say, well, all those other countries have kings. How come we don't have a king? Don't you think we could deal with this drought and possible climate change and the incursion from all these sea peoples and the Hittites on our border and the Egyptians have disappeared? Don't you think we could use a king? Samuel is going to be the one who is leading Israel when these questions are asked. So we know Samuel only as a public figure. We're hearing his leadership story because that's what Samuel is recounting, the leadership stories. Samuel the book is recounting the leadership story of Samuel the person. We're not hearing about, what Samuel liked to eat or what his wife's name was, stuff like that. What we know about Samuel as a person is that he was very faithful, that people trusted him, and that he had a trusting relationship with God. He seems to be a pretty good guy in the whole story of Samuel. So if you've looked at the readings, I've included 3 readings from 1 Samuel. There's a little bit of an interesting situation going on, and I think it raises a larger issue. When we meet Samuel, he's serving with Eli, and we find out that Eli's sons are pretty unworthy of the tasks of Eli, and God brings Samuel into the picture. Later in the story, we're going to find out that Samuel's sons aren't really up to the task. And I think that is starting to launch the lingering questions of a monarchy. What do you do if you have a leader and they're great, they're faithful, but their kids are a mess? And that is going to be a major issue that the Israelites and the Judeans deal with over and over again, and we get to read about in the Hebrew Bible. So our first reading for this class, I'm looking at the packet here, is 1 Samuel 3, and that is the story of the call of Samuel. I remember learning about this as a kid, this idea that you could lay in bed at night and God could call your name and you'd get up and say, "Are you calling my name?" It was a very exciting thing when I was a kid because I think I was already preparing maybe for having a call to ministry, who knows. And I love this line here, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." And we get the idea in here that Eli's family is in trouble, and it's a good thing God has called Samuel. And we get the idea that whatever Samuel does is out of faithfulness. In our second reading, 1 Samuel 8, we find out that his sons are having trouble and they're making dishonest gain. And that's when the question gets called by the Israelites, you need to give us a king. And so in 1 Samuel 8, you get to read about what the Hebrew people say to Samuel when they ask him for a king. I love the end of that reading. When Samuel heard all the people said, he repeated it before the Lord. The Lord answered, "Listen to them and give them a king." Then Samuel said to the Israelites, "Everyone go back to your own town." I just think that's fantastic. I think Samuel sounds more annoyed with the people than God was. And then we get in reading C, 1 Samuel 12. they have a king now, and Samuel is sort of, grumpy, and here you go, you got the king you wanted. In 1 Samuel 12, we hear Samuel come back and talk to the Israelites about the decision to let them have a king. He's a little mad. He's not happy about it. And so the question is raised, why can't they have a king? Well, they were supposed to have a king already, and it was supposed to be God. And so Samuel is reading their insistence on a king as a lack of faithfulness. If they would just trust in God and do what God asks and be faithful people, they wouldn't be so worried about what the Ammonites have or what the Egyptians have. So it's very interesting reading. And I think sometimes when we read these stories, we can see them kind of as a small scale thing. This is major changes in the world told here in a very personal form about one leader who is trying to get his people through a hard time after he was called to lead Israel. And that is going to change everything. The idea that they are going to have a king. If you'll go ahead and read those readings from 1 Samuel, I think you're very well equipped now to do that. You'll be able to see what kind of resistance there was to having a king. And you're basically getting this whole political drama about the people demanding to have a king and Samuel in anger letting them have what he doesn't think they should have, but what God agrees to give them. In our next episode, we're going to talk about Saul, the first king, and we're going to learn about his weaknesses and who he was publicly and maybe even a little bit privately. And we're going to get the character summary of him from the books of Samuel. So I look forward to seeing you in future episodes. Thanks for watching The United Monarchy, Episode 1.